Rumpelstiltskin.
Once upon a time there was a miller who was very poor, but who had a beautiful daughter. Now it happened that he had an audience with the king, and in order to make himself appear as a person of importance, he said to him, "I have a daughter who can spin straw into gold." The king said to the miller, "That is an art which pleases me well. If your daughter is as clever as you say, bring her tomorrow to my palace, and I will try what she can do." And when the girl was brought to him, he took her into a room which was quite full of straw, gave her a spinning wheel and a reel, and said, "Now set to work, and if by tomorrow morning early you have not spun this straw into gold during the night, you must die." Thereupon he himself locked up the room and left her in it alone. So there sat the poor miller's daughter, and for the life of her could not tell what to do. She had no idea how straw could be spun into gold, and she grew more and more miserable, until at last she began to weep. But all at once the door opened, and in came a little man, and said, "Good evening, Mistress Miller. Why are you crying so?" "Alas," answered the girl, "I have to spin straw into gold, and I do not know how to do it." "What will you give me," said the mannikin, "if I do it for you?" "My necklace," said the girl. The little man took the necklace, seated himself in front of the wheel, and whirr, 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 3 turns, and the reel was full. Then he put another on, and whirr, 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 3 times round, and the second was full too. And so it went on until the morning, when all the straw was spun, and all the reels were full of gold. By daybreak the king was already there, and when he saw the gold he was astonished and delighted. But his heart became only more greedy. He had the miller's daughter taken into another room full of straw, which was much larger, and commanded her to spin that also in one night, if she valued her life. The girl knew not how to help herself, and was crying, when the door again opened, and the little man appeared and said, "What will you give me if I spin that straw into gold for you?" "The ring on my finger," answered the girl. The little man took the ring, and again began to turn the wheel, and by morning had spun all the straw into glittering gold. The king rejoiced beyond measure at the sight, but still he had not gold enough, and he had the miller's daughter taken into a still larger room full of straw, and said, "You must spin this too in the course of the night. But if you succeed, you shall be my wife." Even if she be a miller's daughter, thought he, I could not find a richer wife in the whole world. When the girl was alone, the mannikin came again for the 3rd time, and said, "What will you give me if I spin the straw for you this time also?" "I have nothing left that I could give," answered the girl. "Then promise me, if you should become queen, your first child." "Who knows whether that will ever happen?" thought the miller's daughter, and not knowing how else to help herself in this strait, she promised the mannikin what he wanted, and for that he once more span the straw into gold. And when the king came in the morning and found all as he had wished, he took her in marriage, and the pretty miller's daughter became a queen. A year after, she had a beautiful child, and she never gave a thought to the mannikin. But suddenly, one day, he came into her room and said, "Now give me what you promised." The queen was horror-struck, and offered the mannikin all the riches of the kingdom if he would leave her the child. But the mannikin said, "No, something that is living is dearer to me than all the treasures in the world." Then the queen began to weep and cry, so that the mannikin pitied her. "I will give you 3 days," said he. "If by that time you find out my name, then you shall keep your child." So the queen thought the whole night of all the names that she had ever heard, and she sent a messenger over the country to inquire, far and wide, for any other names that there might be. When the mannikin came the next day, she began with Caspar, Melchior, Balthazar, and said all the names she knew one after another. But to every one the little man said, "That is not my name." On the second day she had inquiries made into the neighbourhood as to the names of the people there, and she repeated to the mannikin the most uncommon and curious. "Perhaps your name is Shortribs, or Sheepshanks, or Laceleg." But he always answered, "That is not my name." On the third day the messenger came back again and said, "I have not been able to find a single new name, but as I came to a high mountain at the end of the forest, where the fox and the hare bid each other good night, there I saw a little house, and before the house a fire was burning, and round about the fire quite a ridiculous little man was jumping. He hopped upon one leg and shouted, "Today I bake, tomorrow brew, the next I'll have the young queen's child. Ha! Glad am I that no one knew. That Rumpelstiltskin I am styled." You may think how glad the queen was when she heard the name, and when soon afterwards the little man came in and asked, "Now, Mistress Queen, what is my name?" At first she said, "Is your name Conrad?" "No." "Is your name Harry?" "No." "Perhaps your name is Rumpelstiltskin?" "The devil told you that! The devil told you that!" cried the little man, and in his anger he plunged his right foot so deep into the earth that his whole leg went in, and then in rage he pulled at his left leg so hard with both hands that he tore himself in two.
Circe the Beautiful Witch.
Now he and his men sailed on across the wine-dark sea, until once again they caught sight of an island. They slipped their boat into a snug little harbour, and there they slept for 2 whole days. The following morning Odysseus said that they should explore the island and discover who lived there. At these words his men grew afraid. They remembered the terrible Cyclops who had kept them prisoner in his cave and devoured some of their companions. Odysseus divided his men into 2 groups, so that if one should get into trouble, the other could come and help. He was leader of one group, and Lord Eurylochus was leader of the other. They drew straws to see which group should go and explore first, and as Eurylochus drew the short straw, he and his men had to set out and explore the woods. After walking 2 or 3 hours, the men came to a clearing. They saw a little house surrounded by wild beasts, wolves, leopards, and lions. One of the leopards sprang towards Eurylochus. He thought he was about to die, but instead of eating him, the leopard rubbed up against him like a cat and purred. The window of the house was open, and inside a woman was singing. Her voice was mysterious but very beautiful, and the men felt themselves being drawn towards the house, for they all longed to see if the woman was as wonderful as her voice. They walked past the fierce-looking beasts, who in fact were really quite tame. Inside, they were greeted by a tall and elegant woman, her black hair done up in braids. She did indeed look very lovely. Her name was Circe, and she invited the men to sit down at her table and drink some of her soup. They readily agreed. As they drank the soup, Eurylochus said, "When I drew the short straw, I cursed my bad luck. But how wrong I was! Our hostess is not so terrible after all, amen?" But they did not realise that though she was beautiful, Circe was in fact a witch. She had slipped a magic potion into their soup, and when they had finished drinking it, she rapped the table with a magic wand and said, "Now, you swine, be off to the pigsty where you belong." The men looked astonished. "Madam, did you just call us pigs?" asked Eurylochus. But Circe just laughed in reply, for the nose of Eurylochus was already growing into a pink snout, and his hands were becoming hairy trotters. In fact, all his men were swiftly turning into pigs. They tried to weep and cry out, but all they could do was snort and squeal. "Now do as I say," cried Circe. "Pigs belong in the sty, not in my kitchen. Be off with you." And off they trotted to their new home. When the men did not return to the ship, Odysseus grew worried, and he decided to go and search for them. He set out across the island in the direction of the smoke he had seen from the cottage. While he was walking through the woods, he met a young man, more of a boy, whose beard was still soft and downy on his face. "Stranger, what are you doing here?" asked the young man. "I'm going in search of my men who are lost," said Odysseus. "No doubt they are guests of the lovely Circe. You won't find them in her house, but outside in the pigsty. For beautiful though she is really a witch, and she turns men into beasts. And if you step inside her house, she will turn you into a pig too." "My men turned into pigs!" exclaimed Odysseus. "Is this how you treat guests on this island?" The young man did not reply, but he took a small plant out of his knapsack and handed it to Odysseus. Its stem was black, and its flower as white as milk. "Eat this," he said. "It will make you safe against all magic tricks and potions. The name of this plant is moly. It is dangerous for mere mortals to pluck, for only gods can take it out of the ground safely." And when he spoke these words, Odysseus realized that this was no ordinary young man, but Hermes, the messenger of the gods. And so he ate the moly plant and went on his way. Soon he came to the house in the woods that was guarded by the wild beasts. Circe's lovely singing voice drifted out through the window, and Odysseus walked boldly past the beasts and into the house. Inside, he was greeted by the beautiful witch, who told him to sit down and try some of her soup. While she was heating it, she slipped some magic potion into the broth, for she intended to turn Odysseus into a pig like the others. She gave the soup to him, and he drank it all down, and then she took out her wand and rapped the table with it. "Now be off with you to the sty, pig face!" But Odysseus did not turn into a pig. Instead, he leapt to his feet, drew his sword, and rushed at Circe. She, terrified, let out a shriek and fell to his feet, begging for mercy. "Please, great lord, do not take such offence. It was just my strange sense of humour. It comes from living alone so long here in the woods with nothing but wild beasts for company. It is many years since I have seen a strong, brave man like you. Come, let me kiss you." Odysseus let the beautiful witch kiss him, but all the time he was watching to see that she did not try any more of her tricks. She called her servant girls and commanded them to prepare a bath for their visitor. They brought hot and cold water and mixed the bath until it was just right. And when Odysseus had bathed and rested, he found that they had prepared a delicious meal for him. "Come, why do you look so sad?" asked Circe. "Let us eat together and wash the food down with honeyed wine." "How can a leader eat?" asked Odysseus, "when he knows that his companions are living outside in the muddy pigsty?" And when he spoke these words, Circe knew that it was no use pretending any longer that she was anything other than a witch. She went out to the pigsty and rubbed a magic ointment into the animals. Then she waved her wand, and they began to change back into men, only younger and better looking than they were before. And they began to weep, for what they had been through was truly terrible. When they had recovered, Odysseus went back to the ship to fetch the rest of his men. They were all united at Circe's house and sat down to a wonderful feast of celebration. The Greeks stayed with the witch Circe for an entire month, and she didn't try any more of her magic tricks on them. One morning, Odysseus spoke to her. "Oh, beautiful enchantress, too long have we enjoyed your hospitality. We must continue our journey to our home on the rocky island of Ithaca. But unfortunately we are completely lost. We do not know these seas. Can you direct us by the safest route?" And Circe replied, "Lord Odysseus, if it were up to me, I would keep you here always. But I understand that you must be on your way to your home and your lovely wife, Queen Penelope. There is no safe route for you and your men to return home. For when you leave here, you must pass through a narrow strait between the rocks of Scylla and the whirlpool of Charybdis. Both are perilous, for Scylla is a many-armed monster who yelps like her dog. If you sail close to her cliffs, she will reach down and grab some of your men and shove them into her mouth. But if you sail too close to the whirlpool of Charybdis, your entire boat will be sunk down to the bottom of the sea, and all of you will drown. It is a terrible choice to make, but you are a leader. so plot your course as you see best. Next, if the god permits you to pass through that dire strait, you will come to the island of the sun, where the great sun god, Lord Apollo, keeps his herd of sacred cows. Do as I say. Steer clear of the island and do not land there. Nothing and nobody escapes the eyes of Apollo as he looks down from the sky. If you value your lives, avoid his island. And so Odysseus and his men said farewell to the lovely Circe, and sailed on their way. After 3 days, just as she had foretold, they reached the narrow passage that she had described. Up on the cliffs they could hear the monster Scylla yelping like a dog that had been left tied up for too long. As they drew near, they could hear the terrible gurgling sound of the whirlpool Charybdis. "This is indeed a terrible choice," thought Odysseus. "But the lesser evil is to lose some of my men than for us all to drown. Therefore I must chart my course closer to the cliffs than the whirlpool." He did not tell his men about Scylla, in case they lost heart and put down their oars. All his men's eyes were on the dreadful whirlpool, gurgling like a cauldron. The men rowed as hard as they could, but as they passed beneath Scylla, she reached down to the ship. Odysseus fought her with his spear, desperately trying to stab at her arms, but he could not prevent her snatching up 6 of his men. The others rowed on, crying for their companions. Once they passed through the strait, they saw the island of the sun, just as Circe had predicted. "Thank heavens for land!" cried the men. But Odysseus tried to tell them it was no good. They must not land but sail on, for Circe had warned him of terrible danger should they set foot on the island belonging to the great sun god, Lord Apollo. "Are you a slave driver?" cried out Lord Eurylochus. "In your rush to reach home, you deny us all rest? We are all still grieving for our 6 lost companions. You cannot order us to sail on. We will surely die of sadness and exhaustion." And seeing that the men meant rebellion, Odysseus allowed the ship to land with great misgiving in his heart. They found the island was covered in green fields, and that fat cattle were grazing. The men waited for Odysseus to fall asleep, and then they killed 2 cows and ate roast meat on the beach. But when the sun rose in the morning, bright Apollo saw what they had done, and said to Zeus, who is lord of all the gods, "Great Lord, I am wronged. These rascals and ruffians who crew the ship of that tricky Greek Odysseus have killed the sacred cattle that bring joy to my heart. If you will not punish them, I shall go down to the land of the dead and light up the gloomy underworld. No more shall I shine in the skies above the world." And when Zeus heard these words, he replied, "It is indeed a crime to take what rightly belongs to the gods. When these men set sail tomorrow, I shall hit their boat with a burning thunderbolt." The next day, Odysseus told his men to set sail. When they were out at sea, the sun disappeared behind a black cloud. The dark skies filled with lightning, and an electric flash shot down from the hand of Lord Zeus and hit their boat, ripping it in 2. All the men fell into the raging sea. Odysseus clung for his life to the broken mast of the ship, and somehow survived the storm. The sun shone once again on the now calm waters, and Odysseus saw land. Using his last strength, he swam into the shore and staggered onto the beach, where he fell down, exhausted.
The 12 Dancing Princesses.
Once upon a time there lived, in a village in the mountains, a little cowherd without either father or mother. His real name was Michael, but he was always called the Stargazer, because when he drove his cows over the fields, he went along with his head in the air, gaping at the sky. As he had white skin, blue eyes, and hair that curled all over his head, the village girls used to cry after him, "Well, Stargazer, what are you doing?" And Michael would answer, "Oh, nothing," and go on his way without even turning to look at them. The fact was, he thought them very ugly, with their sunburnt necks, their great red hands, their coarse petticoats, and their wooden shoes. He had heard that somewhere in the world there were girls whose necks were white and whose hands were small, who were always dressed in the finest silks and laces, and were called princesses. At night, he and his friends sat around the fire, looking into the flames and imagining their future lives. His friends had very ordinary fancies, but he dreamed that one day he would marry a princess. One morning, about the middle of August, just at midday when the sun was hottest, Michael ate his dinner of a piece of dry bread and went to sleep under an oak tree. And while he slept, he dreamt of a beautiful lady dressed in a robe of gold, who said to him, "Go to the castle of Belle-Isle, and there you shall marry a princess." That evening, the little cowboy, who had been thinking a great deal about the advice of the lady in the golden dress, told his dream to the farm people. But as was natural, they only laughed at the Stargazer. The next day, at the same hour, he went to sleep again under the same tree. The lady appeared to him a second time and said, "Go to the castle of Belle-Isle, and you shall marry a princess." In the evening, Michael told his friends that he had dreamt the same dream again, but they only laughed at him more than before. "Never mind," he thought to himself. "If the lady appears to me a third time, I will do as she tells me." The following day, to the great astonishment of all the village, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a voice was heard singing, "Rail, rail, how the cattle go!" It was the little cowboy driving his herd back to the cowshed. The farmer began to scold him furiously, saying it was far too soon to bring the cows home. But he answered quietly, "I'm going away," made his clothes into a bundle, said goodbye to all his friends, and boldly set out to seek his princess. There was great excitement throughout all the village, and on top of the hill the people stood holding their sides with laughter as they watched the Stargazer trudging bravely along the valley with his bundle at the end of his stick. It was enough to make anyone laugh, certainly. It was well known for a full 20 miles round that there lived in the castle of Belle-Isle 12 princesses of wonderful beauty, and as proud as they were beautiful, and who were besides so very sensitive and of such truly royal blood that each would have felt at once the presence of a pea in her bed, even if the mattress had been laid over it. It was whispered about that they led exactly the lives that princesses ought to lead, sleeping far into the morning and never getting up till midday. They had 12 beds, all in the same room. But what was very extraordinary was the fact that though they were all locked in by triple bolts, every morning their satin shoes were found worn into holes. When the Duke asked what they had been doing all night, they always answered that they had been asleep. And indeed, no noise was ever heard in the room. Yet the shoes could not wear themselves out alone. At last the Duke of Belle-Isle ordered the trumpet to be sounded, and a proclamation to be made that whoever could discover how his daughters wore out their shoes should choose one of them for his wife. On hearing the proclamation, a number of princes arrived at the castle to try their luck. They watched all night behind the open door of the princesses, but when the morning came, they had all disappeared, and no one could tell what had become of them. When he reached the castle at last, Michael went straight to the gardener and asked him for a job in the garden. And though the stargazer did not look very sturdy, the gardener agreed to take him on, as he thought that his pretty face and golden curls would please the princess. The gardener told Michael that when the princesses got up, he was to present each one with a bouquet, and Michael thought that if he had nothing more unpleasant to do than that, he should get on very well. And so he placed himself behind the door of the princess's room, with the 12 bouquets in a basket. When they arose, he gave one to each of the sisters. The princesses took the flowers without even deigning to look at the lad, except Lena, the youngest, who fixed her large black eyes as soft as velvet on him, and exclaimed, "Ah, how pretty he is, our new flower boy!" The rest all burst out laughing, and the eldest pointed out that a princess ought never to lower herself by looking at a garden boy. Now the beautiful eyes of the Princess Lena inspired Michael with a passionate longing to try his fate and see if he could discover the secret of satin shoes that were worn out every night. This was his only chance to win her hand in marriage. However, he did not dare to come forward, being afraid that he should only be jeered at or even turned away from the castle on account of his impudence. And so he loved the Princess Lena and her dark eyes without saying a word to anybody. Then the stargazer had another dream. The lady in the golden dress appeared to him once more, holding in one hand 2 young trees, a cherry laurel and a rose laurel, and in the other hand a little golden rake, a little golden bucket, and a silken towel. She spoke to him as follows: "Plant these 2 laurels in 2 large pots. Rake them over with the rake, water them with the bucket, and wipe them with the towel. When they have grown as tall as a girl of 15, say to each of them, 'My beautiful laurel, with the golden rake, I have raked you. With the golden bucket, I have watered you. With the silk towel, I have wiped you. Then after that, ask anything you choose, and the laurels will give it to you.'" Michael thanked the lady in the golden dress, and when he woke, he found the 2 laurel bushes beside him. So he carefully obeyed the orders he had been given by the lady. The trees grew very fast, and when they were as tall as a girl of 15, he said to the cherry laurel, "My lovely cherry laurel, with the golden rake I have raked thee. With the golden bucket I have watered thee. With the silk towel I have wiped thee. Teach me how to become invisible." Then there instantly appeared on the laurel a pretty white flower, which Michael gathered and stuck into his buttonhole. As soon as he had done so, he saw his hands and arms disappear, and then his entire body, and soon he was completely invisible. That evening, when the princesses went upstairs to bed, he followed them barefoot, so that he might make no noise, and hid himself under one of the 12 beds, so as not to take up too much room. The princesses began at once to open their wardrobes and boxes. They took out of them the most magnificent dresses, which they put on before their mirrors, and when they had finished, turned themselves all round to admire their appearances. Michael could see nothing from his hiding place, but he could hear everything, and he listened to the princesses laughing and jumping with pleasure. At last the eldest said, "Be quick, my sisters, our partners will be impatient." At the end of an hour, when the stargazer heard no more noises, he peeped out and saw the 12 sisters in splendid garments, with their satin shoes on their feet, and in their hands the bouquets he had brought them. "Are you ready?" asked the eldest. "Yes," replied the other 11 in chorus, and they took their places one by one behind her. Then the eldest princess clapped her hands 3 times, and a trap door opened. All the princesses disappeared down a secret staircase, and Michael hastily followed them. As he was following on the steps of the Princess Lena, he carelessly trod on her dress. "There is somebody behind me," cried the princess. "They are holding my dress." "You foolish thing," said her eldest sister. "You are always afraid of something. It is only a nail which caught you." They went down, 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 till at last they came to a passage with a door at one end, which was only fastened with a latch. The eldest princess opened it, and they found themselves immediately in a lovely little wood, where the leaves were spangled with drops of silver, which shone in the brilliant light of the moon. They next crossed another wood, where the leaves were sprinkled with gold, and after that another still, where the leaves were glittered with diamonds. At last the stargazer saw a large lake, and on the shores of the lake 12 little boats with awnings, in which were seated 12 princes, who, grasping their oars, awaited the princesses. Each princess entered one of the boats, and Michael slipped into the one which held the youngest. The boats glided along rapidly, but Lena's, from being heavier, was always behind the rest. "We never went so slowly before," said the princess. "What can be the reason?" "I don't know," answered the prince. "I assure you I am rowing as hard as I can." On the other side of the lake, the garden boy saw a beautiful castle, splendidly illuminated, from which came the lively music of fiddles, kettledrums, and trumpets. In a moment they touched land, and the company jumped out of the boats, and the princes, after having securely fastened their boats, gave their arms to the princesses and led them to the castle. Michael followed and entered the ballroom with them. Everywhere were mirrors, lights, flowers, and silk hangings. The stargazer was quite bewildered at the magnificence of the sight. He placed himself out of the way in a corner, admiring the grace and beauty of the princesses. Their loveliness was of every kind. Some were fair and some were dark. Some had chestnut hair or curls darker still, and some had golden locks. Never were so many beautiful princesses seen together at one time, but the one whom the cowboy thought the most beautiful and the most fascinating was the little princess with the velvet eyes. With what eagerness she danced! Leaning on her partner's shoulders, she swept by like a whirlwind. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes sparkled, and it was plain that she loved dancing. As they came back, Michael gathered a branch from the wood with the gold-spangled leaves, and now it was the eldest princess who heard the noise that it made in breaking. "It is nothing," said Lena, "only the cry of the owl, which roosts in the turrets of the castle." As soon as she got up, she found the branch in her bouquet. When the sisters went down, she stayed a little behind and said to the cowboy, "Where does this branch come from?" "Your Royal Highness knows well enough," answered Michael. "So you have followed us?" "Yes, Princess." "How did you manage it? We never saw you." "I hid myself," replied the stargazer quietly. The princess was silent a moment, and then said, "You know our secret." "Keep it. Here is the reward for your discretion." And she flung the boy a purse of gold. "I do not sell my silence," answered Michael, and he went away without picking up the purse. For 3 nights Lena neither saw nor heard anything extraordinary. On the 4th, she heard a rustling among the diamond-spangled leaves of the wood. That day there was a branch of the trees in her bouquet. She took the stargazer aside and said to him in a harsh voice, "You know what price my father has promised to pay for our secret?" "I know." "Don't you mean to tell him?" "That is not my intention." "Are you afraid?" "No, Princess." "What makes you so discreet then?" But Michael was silent. Lena's sisters had seen her talking to the little garden boy and jeered at her for it. "What prevents your marrying him?" asked the eldest. "You would become a gardener too. It is a charming profession. You could live in a cottage at the end of the park and help your husband to draw up water from the well. And when we get up, you could bring us our bouquets." The Princess Lena was very angry, and when the stargazer presented her bouquet, she received it in a disdainful manner. Michael behaved most respectfully. He never raised his eyes to her, but nearly all day she felt him at her side without ever seeing him. One day she made up her mind to tell everything to her eldest sister. "What?" said she. "This rogue knows our secret, and you never told me? I must lose no time in getting rid of him." "But how?" "Why, by having him taken to the tower with dungeons, of course." For this was the way that in old times beautiful princesses got rid of people who knew too much. But the astonishing part of it was that the younger sister did not seem at all to relish the idea of throwing the boy into the dungeon. At last it was decided that Michael should be put to the test, that they would take him to the ball, and at the end of supper would give him the magic potion which was to enchant him like the rest. In fact, he had been present, invisible, while the princesses had made their plans, and had heard all. But he had made up his mind to drink of the potion and sacrifice himself to the happiness of her he loved. Not wishing, however, to cut a poor figure at the ball by the side of the other dancers, he went at once to the laurels and said, "My lovely rose laurel, with the golden rake, I have raked thee. With the golden bucket, I have watered thee. With the silken towel, I have dried thee. Dress me like a prince." A beautiful pink flower appeared. Michael gathered it, and found himself in a moment clothed in velvet, which was as black as the eyes of the little princess, with a cap to match, a diamond aigrette, and a blossom of the rose laurel in his buttonhole. This time he did not cross in Lena's boat. He gave his arm to the eldest sister, danced with each in turn, and was so graceful that everyone was delighted with him. At last the time came for him to dance with the little princess. She found him the best partner in the world, but he did not dare to speak a single word to her. When he was taking her back to her palace, she said to him in a mocking voice, "Here you are at the summit of your wishes. You are being treated like a prince." "Don't be afraid," replied the stargazer gently. "You shall never be a gardener's wife." The little princess stared at him with a frightened face, and he left her without waiting for an answer. At last the eldest sister made a sign, and one of the page boys brought in a large golden cup. "The enchanted castle has no more secrets for you," she said to the stargazer. "Let us drink to your triumph." He cast a lingering glance at the little princess, and without hesitation lifted the cup. "Don't drink!" suddenly cried out the little princess. "I would rather marry a gardener!" And she burst into tears. Michael flung the contents of the cup behind him, sprang over the table, and fell at Lena's feet. The rest of the princes fell likewise at the knees of the princesses, each of whom chose a husband and raised him to her side. The charm was broken. The 12 couples embarked in the boats. They went straight to the room of the Duke, who had just awoke. Michael held in his hand the golden cup, and he revealed the secret of the holes in the shoes. "Choose then," said the Duke, "whichever of my daughters you prefer." "My choice is already made," replied the garden boy, and he offered his hand to the youngest princess, who blushed and lowered her eyes. The Princess Lena did not become a gardener's wife. On the contrary, it was the stargazer who became a prince.
The Happy Prince.
High above the city, on a tall column, stood the statue of the Happy Prince. He was gilded all over with thin leaves of fine gold. For eyes he had 2 bright sapphires, and a large red ruby glowed on his sword hilt. He was very much admired indeed. "He is as beautiful as a weathercock," remarked one of the town councillors, who wished to gain a reputation for having artistic tastes. "Only not quite so useful," he added, fearing lest people should think him unpractical, which he really was not. "Why can't you be like the Happy Prince?" asked a sensible mother of her little boy, who was crying for the moon. "The Happy Prince never dreams of crying for anything." "I am glad there is someone in the world who is quite happy," muttered a disappointed man as he gazed at the wonderful statue. "He looks just like an angel," said the charity children as they came out of the cathedral in their bright scarlet cloaks and their clean white pinafores. "How do you know?" said the mathematical master. "You have never seen one." "Ah, but we have in our dreams," answered the children. And the mathematical master frowned and looked very severe, for he did not approve of children dreaming. One night there flew over the city a little swallow. His friends had gone away to Egypt 6 weeks before, but he had stayed behind, for he was in love with the most beautiful reed. He had met her early in the spring as he was flying down the river after a big yellow moth, and had been so attracted by her slender waist that he had stopped to talk to her. "Shall I love you?" said the swallow, who liked to come to the point at once, and the reed made him a low bow. So he flew round and round her, touching the water with his wings and making silver ripples. This was his courtship, and it lasted all through the summer. "It is a ridiculous attachment," twittered the other swallows. "She has no money, and far too many relations." And indeed the river was quite full of reeds. Then when the autumn came, they all flew away. After they had gone, he felt lonely and began to tire of his lady love. "She has no conversation," he said, "and I am afraid that she is a coquette, for she is always flirting with the wind. And certainly, whenever the wind blew, the reed made the most graceful curtsies. I admit that she is domestic," he continued, "but I love travelling, and my wife consequently should love travelling also. Will you come away with me?" he said finally to her. But the reed shook her head. She was so attached to her home. "You have been trifling with me," he cried. "I am off to the pyramids. Goodbye." And he flew away. All day long he flew, and at night time he arrived at the city. "Where shall I put up?" he said. "I hope the town has made preparations." Then he saw the statue on the tall column. "I will put up there," he cried. "It is a fine position, with plenty of fresh air." So he alighted just between the feet of the Happy Prince. "I have a golden bedroom," he said softly to himself as he looked round and he prepared to go to sleep. But just as he was putting his head under his wing, a large drop of water fell on him. "What a curious thing!" he cried. "There is not a single cloud in the sky. The stars are quite clear and bright, and yet it is raining. The climate in the north of Europe really is quite dreadful. The reed used to like the rain, but that was merely her selfishness." Then another drop fell. "What is the use of a statue if it cannot keep the rain off?" he said. "I must look for a good chimney pot." And he determined to fly away. But before he had opened his wings, a third drop fell, and he looked up and saw... what did he see? The eyes of the Happy Prince were filled with tears, and tears were running down his golden cheeks. His face was so beautiful in the moonlight that the little swallow was filled with pity. "Who are you?" he said. "I am the Happy Prince." "Why are you weeping, then?" asked the swallow. "You have quite drenched me." "When I was alive and had a human heart," answered the statue, "I did not know what tears were, for I lived in the palace of Sans Souci, where sorrow is not allowed to enter. In the daytime I played with my companions in the garden, and in the evening I led the dance in the great hall. Round the garden ran a very lofty wall, but I never cared to ask what lay beyond it. Everything about me was so beautiful. My courtiers called me the Happy Prince, and happy indeed I was, if pleasure be happiness. So I lived, so I died. And now that I am dead, they have set me up here so high that I can see all the ugliness and all the misery of my city. And though my heart is made of lead, yet I cannot choose but weep. Is he not solid gold? Said the swallow to himself. He was too polite to make any personal remarks out loud. Far away, continued the statue in a low musical voice, far away in a little street there is a poor house. One of the windows is open, and through it I can see a woman seated at her table. Her face is thin and worn, and she has coarse red hands, all pricked by the needle, for she is a seam mistress. She is embroidering passion flowers on a satin gown for the loveliest of the Queen's maids of honour to wear at the next court ball. In a bed in the corner of the room, her little boy is lying ill. He has a fever and is asking for oranges. His mother has nothing to give him but river water, so he is crying, "Swallow, swallow, little swallow, Will you not bring her the ruby out of my sword hilt? My feet are fastened to this pedestal, and I cannot move. I am waited for in Egypt, said the swallow. My friends are flying up and down the Nile and walking to the large lotus flowers. Soon they will go to sleep in the tomb of the great king. The king is there himself in his painted coffin. He is wrapped in yellow linen and embalmed with spices. Round his neck is a chain of pale green jade, and his hands are like withered leaves. Swallow, 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 said the prince. Will you not stay with me for one night and be my messenger? The boy is so thirsty, and the mother so sad. I don't think I like boys, answered the swallow. Last summer, when I was staying on the river, there were 2 rude boys who were always throwing stones at me. They never hit me, of course. We swallows fly far too well for that. And besides, I come of a family famous for its agility. But still, it was a mark of disrespect. But the happy prince looked so sad that the little swallow was sorry. It is very cold here, he said, but I will stay with you for one night and be your messenger. Thank you, little swallow, said the prince. So the swallow picked out the great ruby from the prince's sword and flew away with it in his beak over the roofs of the town. He passed by the cathedral tower where the white marble angels were sculptured. He passed by the palace and heard the sound of dancing. A beautiful girl came out on the balcony with her lover. How wonderful the stars are, he said to her. And how wonderful is the power of love. I hope my dress will be ready in time for the state ball, she answered. I have ordered passion flowers to be embroidered on it, but the sea mistresses are so lazy. At last he came to the poor house and looked in. The boy was tossing feverishly on his bed, and the mother had fallen asleep, she was so tired. In he hopped and laid the great ruby on the table beside the woman's thimble. Then he flew gently round the bed, fanning the boy's forehead with his wings. How cool I feel, said the boy. I must be getting better. And he sank into a delicious slumber. Then the swallow flew back to the happy prince and told him what he had done. It is curious, he remarked, but I feel quite warm now, although it is so cold. That is because you have done a good action, said the prince. And the little swallow began to think, and then he fell asleep. Thinking always made him sleepy. When day broke, he flew down to the river and had a bath. What a remarkable phenomenon, said the professor of ornithology as he was passing over the bridge. A swallow in winter? And he wrote a long letter about it to the local newspaper. Everyone quoted it. It was full of so many words that they could not understand. Tonight I go to Egypt, said the swallow, and he was in high spirits at the prospect. and sat a long time on top of the church steeple. Wherever he went, the sparrows chirruped and said to each other, "What a distinguished stranger!" So he enjoyed himself very much. When the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. "Have you any commissions for Egypt?" he cried. "I am just starting." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "will you not stay with me one night longer?" "I am waited for in Egypt," answered the swallow. "Tomorrow my friends will fly up to the second cataract. The river horse crouches there among the bulrushes, and on a great granite throne sits the god Memnon. All night long he watches the stars, and when the morning star shines, he utters one cry of joy, and then is silent. At noon, the yellow lions come down to the water's edge to drink. They have eyes like green beryls, and their roar is louder than the roar of the cataract." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince. "Far away across the city, I see a young man in a garret. He is leaning over a desk covered with papers, and in a tumbler by his side there is a bunch of withered violets. His hair is brown and crisp, and his lips are red as the pomegranate, and he has large and dreamy eyes. He is trying to finish a play for the director of the theatre, but he is too cold to write any more. There is no fire in the grate, and hunger has made him faint." "I will wait with you one night longer," said the swallow, who really had a good heart. "Shall I take him another ruby?" "Alas, I have no ruby now," said the prince. "My eyes are all that I have left. They are made of rare sapphires, which were brought out of India 1,000 years ago. Pluck out one of them and take it to him. He will sell it to the jeweller and buy food and firewood and finish his play." "Dear prince," said the swallow, "I cannot do that." And he began to weep. "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "do as I command you." So the swallow plucked out the prince's eye and flew away to the student's garret. It was easy enough to get in, as there was a hole in the roof. Through this he darted and came into the room. The young man had his head buried in his hands, so he did not hear the flutter of the bird's wings, and when he looked up, he found the beautiful sapphire lying on the withered violets. "I am beginning to be appreciated," he cried. "This is from some great admirer. Now I can finish my play." And he looked quite happy. The next day the swallow flew down to the harbour. He sat on the mast of a large vessel and watched the sailors hauling big chests out of the hold with ropes. "Heave ahoy!" they shouted as each chest came up. "I am going to Egypt!" cried the swallow. But nobody minded. And when the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. "I am come to bid you goodbye," he cried. "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "will you not stay with me one night longer?" "It is winter," answered the swallow, "and the chill snow will soon be here. In Egypt the sun is warm on the green palm trees, and the crocodiles lie in the mud and look lazily about them. My companions are building a nest in the temple of Baalbek, and the pink and white doves are watching them and cooing to each other. Dear prince, I must leave you, but I will never forget you. And next spring I will bring you back 2 beautiful jewels in place of those you have given away. The ruby shall be redder than a red rose, and the sapphire shall be as blue as the great sea." "In the square below," said the happy prince, "there stands a little match girl. She has let her matches fall in the gutter, and they are all spoiled. Her father will beat her if she does not bring home some money, and she is crying. She has no shoes or stockings, and her little head is bare. Pluck out my other eye and give it to her, and her father will not beat her." "I will stay with you one night longer," said the swallow, "but I cannot pluck out your eye. You would be quite blind then." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "do as I command you." So he plucked out the prince's other eye and darted down with it. He swooped past the match girl and slipped the jewel into the palm of her hand. "What a lovely bit of glass!" cried the little girl, and she ran home laughing. Then the swallow came back to the prince. "You are blind now," he said, "so I will stay with you always." "No, little swallow," said the poor prince. "You must go away to Egypt." "I will stay with you always," said the swallow, and he slept at the prince's feet. All the next day he sat on the prince's shoulder and told him stories of what he had seen in strange lands. He told him of the red ibises, who stand in long rows on the banks of the Nile and catch gold fish in their beaks, of the Sphinx, who is as old as the world itself, and lives in the desert and knows everything, of the merchants who walk slowly by the sides of their camels and carry amber beads in their hands, of the king of the mountains of the moon, who is as black as ebony and worships a large crystal, of the great green snake that sleeps in a palm tree and has 20 priests to feed it with honey cakes, and of the pygmies who sail over a big lake on large flat leaves and are always at war with the butterflies. "Dear little swallow," said the prince, "you tell me of marvellous things, but more marvellous than anything is the suffering of men and of women. There is no mystery so great as misery. "Fly over my city, little swallow, and tell me what you see there." So the swallow flew over the great city and saw the rich making merry in their beautiful houses, while the beggars were sitting at their gates. He flew into dark lanes and saw the white faces of starving children looking out listlessly at the black streets. Under the archway of a bridge, 2 little boys were lying in one another's arms to try and keep themselves warm. "How hungry we are," they said. "You must not lie there," shouted the watchman, and they wandered out into the rain. Then he flew back to the prince and told him what he had seen. "I am covered with fine gold," said the prince. "You must take it off, leaf by leaf, and give it to my poor. The living always think that gold can make them happy." Leaf after leaf of the fine gold the swallow picked off, till the happy prince looked quite dull and grey. Leaf after leaf of the fine gold he brought to the poor, and the children's faces grew rosier, and they laughed and played games in the street. "We have bread now," they cried. Then the snow came, and after the snow came the frost. The streets looked as if they were made of silver. They were so bright and glistening. Long icicles like crystal daggers hung down from the eaves of the houses. Everybody went about in furs, and the little boys wore scarlet caps and skated on the ice. The poor little swallow grew colder and colder, but he would not leave the prince. He loved him too well. He picked up crumbs outside the baker's door when the baker was not looking, and tried to keep himself warm by flapping his wings. But at last he knew that he was going to die. He had just strength to fly up to the prince's shoulder once more. "Goodbye, dear prince," he murmured. "Will you let me kiss your hand?" "I am glad that you are going to Egypt at last, little swallow," said the prince. "You have stayed here too long. But you must kiss me on the lips, for I love you." "It is not to Egypt that I am going," said the swallow. "I am going to the house of death. Death is the brother of sleep, is he not?" And he kissed the happy prince on the lips and fell down dead at his feet. At that moment, a curious crack sounded inside the statue, as if something had broken. The fact is that the leaden heart had snapped right in two. It certainly was a dreadfully hard frost. Early the next morning, the mayor was walking in the square below in company with the town councillors. As they passed the column, he looked up at the statue. "Dear me, how shabby the happy prince looks," he said. "How shabby indeed," cried the town councillors, who always agreed with the mayor. And they went up to look at it. "The ruby has fallen out of his sword. His eyes are gone, and he is golden no longer," said the mayor. "In fact, he is little better than a beggar." "Little better than a beggar!" said the town councillors. "And here's actually a dead bird at his feet," continued the mayor. "We must really issue a proclamation that birds are not to be allowed to die here." And the town clerk made a note of the suggestion. So they pulled down the statue of the Happy Prince. As he is no longer beautiful, he is no longer really useful, said the art professor at the university. And the mayor held a meeting of the corporation to decide what was to be done with the metal. "We must have another statue, of course," he said. "And it shall be a statue of myself." "Of myself," said each of the town councillors, and they quarrelled. When I last heard of them, they were quarrelling still. "What a strange thing," said the overseer of the workmen at the foundry. "This broken lead heart will not melt in the furnace. We must throw it away." So they threw it on a dust heap, where the dead swallow was also lying.
"Bring me the two most precious things in the city,"
said God to one of his angels. And the angel brought him the leaden heart and the dead bird.
"You have rightly chosen,"
said God,
"for in my garden of paradise this little bird shall sing forevermore, and in my city of gold the happy prince shall praise me."